One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. We've got a great show for you today. We've got Amyra Rand, who's the Vice President of Sales and Strategic Partnerships for Criteria Corp. And we're going to be talking about a lot of different things, but the main thing we're going to be talking about is this concept of testing. Because the traditional job application process, which is you create a long job description, people send in their resumes through an ATS, you evaluate that. There's broken elements to that process. It's long, and it also screens out people that have high aptitude but do not have exactly the relevant experience. And so Amyra talks about how you can use testing more effectively to identify people that may not have exactly the right experience, but have the aptitude that's required to be successful in the role and the personality that's going to be a fit for your culture, which is incredibly important, particularly when you're thinking about giving opportunities to underrepresented groups and to people that do not have the traditional background. How are we going to see more diversity in the workplace and more diversity in the executive ranks if diversity is not being accommodated due to lack of experience at the application point? And that is what Amyra and I talk about, and I think it's a really interesting conversation. Now, before we get there, we want to thank our sponsors. We've got two sponsors on the show today. We've got Vidyard. Now, email isn't dead, but it sure is boring. Add video to your emails to stand out in the inbox for free with Vidyard. Vidyard helps you easily record, send, and track who is viewing your video content in 3 easy steps. First, easily record your screen or your cell phone camera. Next, share your videos and email with just a few clicks. Finally, see when someone watches your videos. Vidyard will let you know who clicked play and how much they watched. So go to vidyard.com/saleshacker. That's vidyard.com/saleshacker to learn more. Our second sponsor is the monolithic Outreach, the leading sales engagement platform. Outreach supports you by enabling you to humanize your communications at scale, from automating the soul-sucking manual work that eats up selling time to providing action-oriented tips on what communications are working best. Outreach has your back. Finally, quick update on Revenue Collective, which is the thing that I do during the day. When I started doing this podcast, we were in one city, that is New York. We were probably about 20 people. As of today, we're close to 750 people. We're in 12 official cities, including all of the places, the main places that you would think we are, which is New York, London, San Francisco, and in addition to 9 other places. And we're also incubating new communities in over 25 new cities. So we've got communities in Stockholm, Sweden, Birmingham, Alabama, Kansas City, Missouri, Chicago, Illinois, of course. We've got a few folks in Saskatoon, Canada. We're doing our first happy hour in Montreal pretty soon. We've got folks in Sydney, Australia, Lisbon, Barcelona, all over the world. Executives and now even associates, meaning people that are the up-and-coming managers, director-level folks, even high-performing individual contributors are becoming part of Revenue Collective. The purpose of it is to help each other, to support each other, to enable each other. So if you're interested in learning more, revenuecollective.com. Feel free to reach out in any way that you think is appropriate. That was my little elevator pitch for Revenue Collective before this episode, which is our interview with Amyra Rand. Please enjoy listening to my interview. I think it's a great one. Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. Welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. We're incredibly excited today to have Amyra Rand on the show. Amyra is a member of the Los Angeles Revenue Collective, but also more importantly, a longtime sales executive and has a deep experience in building and growing world-class sales teams. She's currently the Vice President of Sales and Strategic Partnerships at Criteria Corporation, and she spent the last 15 years of her career doing what I just mentioned, growing and scaling sales teams. She has an emphasis on technology startups and leading inside teams. She's worked in the human capital management, healthcare IT, and ERP industries, and her background is in the HR recruiting space. Combined with her years of experience sourcing, interviewing, and hire salespeople gives her a unique perspective on delivering a best-in-class recruiting experience for candidates and hiring managers. Amyra, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Sam.
We're excited to have you. So your title is Vice President of Sales and Strategic Partnerships, and the company is called Criteria Corporation. In your words, what does Criteria Corporation do?
So we are all about people science. So we create aptitude, personality, and skills tests that help hiring managers and chief people officers and organizations find top talent in their candidate pools by using our assessments. So we really try to up the game when it comes to hiring great people and really finding good talent overall in your candidate pools. That's what we do.
That sounds good. We're going to dive into that because I'm interested in it. How big is the company roughly from like an ARR revenue, perspective?
We're right around that $25 million mark ARR.
Okay. Awesome. Fantastic. And how big is the organization from like a headcount perspective, and how big is your team, just so we can, as I say, contextualize your experience?
Of course. We are currently, I think we just hit 90 people or so. And when I started, I was employee number 27, and that was 3.5 years ago.
Wow. Well, congrats on making it 3.5 years.
Thank you.
That's an important number as a VP of sales in the modern era.
Yeah, absolutely.
At first, before we dive into your story and your background and all of that, I am really interested in what you just described that Criteria does. So talk to us about what is the science behind the assessment process? When do you use the assessment? And what are the factors that you're testing for that might not be immediately obvious or evident within a traditional hiring process where somebody submits a resume through an applicant tracking system and they then go into the funnel? How does the introduction of your testing framework help improve talent acquisition and retention?
Yeah, great questions. So the way we encourage people to use testing is use it as early as possible in the process. So really the goal is to collect as much objective data as possible as you're hiring people. So we use it at the very first step in our process. So we have our candidates take our assessments. We give them an aptitude assessment to make sure that we're finding people that have the right problem solving and critical thinking skills for the job. We're in the technology space, and we have really advanced conversations and complex discussions around how testing works, how it can impact an organization. And so we want people that can think quickly on their feet, that can problem solve. And so we give them a test that will measure that. And then we also give them a test that will measure whether or not they're a good fit for the role, whether they're an engineer and they're innovative and they think out of the box, or whether they're on the sales side and they're outgoing, they enjoy talking to people, and they're able to have difficult conversations. So we give an aptitude test and a personality test, and we use that objective data to then inform our decision in terms of, combined with the resume, to determine, do we want to bring this person on site? Do we want to bring them in? Do we want to have a phone interview? Whatever the process may be for that particular role. So really, the more data that you have on the candidate, the better off you are. Resumes can be really misleading, especially on the sales side. Sometimes you'll see somebody and they say, I've never interviewed anybody that's done, that wasn't in the top 3 in performance and didn't hit 100% of their target. So funny how that happens. And, oftentimes you'll find people, they did 125% of quota, which is great. But what I don't have is any context around whether everybody else on their team did 250%. So I think if you can use a number of different data points to bring people in, the better off you are. I think it's also helped. We actually have almost a 50-50 split of male and female on our sales team, which is kind of unheard of, especially in tech. So we're really excited to see how much of our tests have helped us actually have more diversity on our team overall.
How do you do that? How is it that you're going to non-traditional? Do you think that the uneven distribution of men and women in the sales world generally is a function of companies not looking in the right places for female candidates, or their interview process unfairly filtering out female candidates relative to male candidates?
I think it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. I think oftentimes you find that your candidate pool is swayed towards having males in your candidate pool. And that could be for a number of reasons. The places that you're looking, oftentimes we're looking for traditional sales experience in our job descriptions. And so maybe changing your job description, changing the requirements that you might be looking for somebody to qualify for the job. Because if you're looking for a pool of people that has sales experience, by default, you're going to have less females in that pool because they need to have sales experience. So we look for some non-traditional experience. We've changed up our job descriptions materially. And I think our testing really helps you identify people that have a lot of potential. Whereas if you're just looking at resumes and you're just looking for experience, you're going to by default have less women in your candidate pool.
Have you run testing against your testing, so to speak, to understand you mentioned sort of outgoing, although extroversion is actually somewhat controversial quality for salespeople in terms of its correlation to success. But have you run correlations against personality attributes relative to your tests that seem to inform, good production when it comes to sales talent? And I guess the second part of that follow-up question is there anything that's surprising that you did not expect, specifically around personality type, that sort of emerged from the data?
Yes. So we do local validity studies all the time. So of course, our tests have been validated against, using the EEOC guidelines. So in terms of minimizing adverse impact, you name it, we use the UGESP, which are kind of the guidelines for testing. We also, all of our testing is scientifically validated. So we're all about helping to predict results and helping to predict success in a role. So that being said, we do a ton of local validity studies, and we do this with some of the largest companies in the world. But what we do is we take a look at somebody's sales team, for example, and this is kind of how we validated whether or not our tests work and help provide results. So what we do is we look at your high, your medium, and your low performers in an organization with a statistically significant sample. What we do is we get some objective and subjective data around how those performers do in the role, and then we give them the tests. And then we look at, do your top performers actually score better or differently on the assessments? And then we basically can build a profile around that when you're looking for candidates. So I think that one of the things that I found most surprising, because a lot of people will ask, should I just look at my high performers? And the answer is no, because then I'm looking at this in a bubble and very myopically. So instead, one of the things that I would think is that salespeople, motivation has to be one of the key differentiators between, has to contribute to being good at sales. And what we found out is that people that were high performers had really high motivation, but an equal number of low performers had high motivation. So motivation isn't actually a direct contributor to success in the role. We've also found that, and a lot of people think that personality is such a big driver, which it absolutely is, specifically for sales, as well as a number of other roles. But the aptitude piece is actually really critical as well. Because it's great if you've been in the same industry for 15 years, but I personally, I've jumped around from industry to industry. And so kind of learning a new product, learning the new personas, learning what the key challenges are by persona, and being able to really hear a client, hear their challenges, and then interpret those challenges into how we can best solve those problems for them takes somebody that's pretty smart. And so I think that the aptitude piece is something that's probably overlooked a lot when it comes to sales.
When you say aptitude, tell me what you mean. Is it case studies and kind of brain teasers? How are you testing for aptitude specifically? And I guess to your point, confirming that when you say aptitude, it's sort of industry agnostic. It's not about specific industry experience. It's about your sort of raw problem solving ability.
Yeah, it is. It's basically raw problem solving. So we look at mathematical reasoning, verbal reasoning, even spatial reasoning. And it is really about problem solving and critical thinking. And how do you, if you're going to approach a problem, how do you approach it? How quickly can you solve that problem? And how quickly can you say, you know what, I can't find the answer to this. I'm just going to make my best guess and go on to the next thing.
Interesting. Do you have an example off the top of your head? It's okay if you don't, have like a question on the aptitude test that you generally ask as sort of illustrative of what you're talking about?
Sure. Even if you're looking at we'll take a couple of words, for example, and we'll have somebody say, hey, what is what's most similar to this word pattern? It feels a little bit like an SAT, for lack of a better description.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a very tight labor market. There is a lot of competition for jobs or for candidates, I guess I would say. Does it impact your conversion rates? Just thinking about it in terms of like a funnel, a talent acquisition funnel, does it impact your conversion rates to put a test at the very outset of the process when candidates have other opportunities, and maybe there's companies that are not making them take what is essentially, some kind of SAT proxy before they apply? Or how do you think about that? Do you balance it with sort of like employer marketing initiatives just to make sure that they really love working at Criteria or have heard of it?
Yeah, we have a few different types of tests. So we actually have an assessment that's about 5 minutes. It's actually gamified. So it's a swipe left, swipe right type concept.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so it's about 5 minutes and it feels like a game. It's actually kind of like, if testing could be cool, it's probably the coolest thing you can get. So a lot of employers are actually opting for those types of assessments that give you a really good talent signal in a really short period of time. So things along those lines. And so what we're seeing is that as long as you're keeping, what we found is, number one, it oftentimes will eliminate some resume spammers. The whole HR, the application process has changed so much that it's really easy, like the one-click apply that you see today. So it actually helps you. A lot of times what we see is that it's the resume spammers or those people that actually aren't good fits for the role to begin with. It eliminates those individuals, or those are the people that aren't applying. So you're still left with a really good candidate pool. But as we're being able to like refine our testing process and make the tests even shorter, we're actually able to capture even more of the candidate market. We also find that it's expanding the candidate pool because you're identifying candidates that you wouldn't have looked at.
That's very interesting. Are you able to accelerate the process from application to job offer because of the testing potentially, in the sense that maybe you have signals that you trust more than the interview process, which is imperfect and probabilistic in nature?
Yeah, I will say we are able to move. So of the people that I take a look at and I look at their resume and I bring them in for a phone interview, 90 to 95% of those make it to an in-person interview. So I've reduced my interviewing time materially. What's nice is oftentimes as a hiring manager, like a lot of times we're doing our own hiring unless we're at a larger company that has a recruiter. And so in cases like that, I only have time to go through normally 25 to 50 resumes, let's say. So I get the 25 to 50 first people that apply. Well, number 51 might be the best candidate in the world and I may miss out on them. So what testing allows you to do is actually kind of like have the cream filter to the top. And you actually can identify people later on in the process and you can bring them in maybe at the 11th hour while you're, you may have gotten your 5 phone interviews teed up, but you're like, oh, this one looks really good. I'm going to reach out to them because you get the test results right away. You get their resume and you're like, hey, you look amazing. Can you come in for a phone and can I get you on a phone interview today? So you're actually able to reach out to people a lot more quickly and get them in off the street and find people later that might be laggards in terms of applying for your role.
And have you tested or correlated retention, and not just your ability to sort of move quickly to an offer, but I'm sure you've confirmed that the testing process in some way leads to longer duration, better onboarding, better ramp, things like that?
Absolutely. Whether it's ramp time, if you're looking at that from a tenure perspective, just making it through training, depending on the type of role we might be talking about, or the challenges the company is having. Also overall tenure and overall productivity. So how much is that person producing and are they producing it in a shorter amount of time?
That's amazing. That's really cool. Well, I'm
a firm believer. I will never go to another company again without like making sure that they use testing in some way, shape, or form.
React to the following statement. I'm not asking a question, I'm making a statement.
Yes.
But my belief is that job descriptions are useless or very, very low value, and that we need to move away from this idea that like you can write everything out in like a one pager, and that will be the thing that either attracts or repulses candidates. I'm much more in favor of things like a video job description, or I'm in favor of what you're talking about, which is some kind of testing process correlated with some kind of cultural fit. And then once we have the results of the test, we can allocate the candidate towards the role that best reflects their skills, as opposed to the process currently of writing up a text-based job description and using that as the initial point of contact with the candidate. What do you think about that?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I would say honestly, we've moved. When I look at our job descriptions today, it's more. First of all, I believe that your job description that HR uses should be completely different than what you actually post anywhere. What we try to post is like, how are you going to feel in the role? What is it going to look like on a, or is this even going to be something you're going to enjoy? what are the things that you might enjoy doing on a day-to-day basis? Like one of the things we say is, hey, we want you to have the gift of gab. We want you to love talking to people. And so it's more about like how you're going to feel in the role than what you're actually going to do, and we talk about like what you might enjoy. I think we're all looking for something bigger and a bigger purpose. And I think the job description is a small piece of that. I think it needs to be there because you need to know I would want to know what the job entails.
Yeah.
Because a sales job here might be very different than a sales job at some other retail store. But I think you don't just look at that. You're looking at Glassdoor. You're looking like you want to see what their website looks like to see, are they diverse? You want to see, do they have, I don't know, like do they do charity events? Is that important to them? You want to find a company that's aligned with your own values and ideals. And I don't know if you can do a good job really communicating that in a job description.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's talk about your journey, because there wasn't this rigorous testing process back when you were coming up, and I think you'd mentioned that originally after college you wanted to go into the FBI. Is that accurate?
Yes, I wanted to go into law enforcement. And all like 5'1" of me. I'm not saying that you can't be short and in law enforcement, but I'm probably not your stereotypical law enforcement agent, nor am I your stereotypical salesperson. But honestly, I had a really good buddy of mine. We're still friends to this day, who said, "Hey, Amyra, I have this, we're hiring for salespeople. Do you want to come in? You'll be able to sell ice cubes to Eskimos at the end of it. And even if you just do it for a year while you're figuring things out, it might be worth it and you'll make good money." And I said, okay. And I literally have been in sales ever since. So I would say the start of my career in sales definitely happened to me. And I was very unintentional about getting into sales, but I had some great sales training and I found out that I actually really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it in a way that I'm not very salesy at all. I think I'm, at least what people traditionally think of as salesy. I think sales has evolved so much in the last 20 years, but I'm all about, hey, you know what? I love fixing problems. And so I love hearing about a customer's problems and having the opportunity to actually help them solve it, to sit on the same side of the table with them and go through that journey and really come up with innovative solutions and partnering with them on making their business more productive. So that's what I really enjoy. And I think, that first step into sales probably wasn't very intentional, but it's become more intentional. I think you have to drive your own career. I think you have to, every move you make, every job you select, you don't run from something, you run to something. And so I'm just a firm believer in kind of being the CEO of your own career.
So when did you learn, how did you figure out that you needed to be the CEO of your own career? When did you get this religion around intentionality?
I actually had a great mentor. Her name was Nina Smith, and she kind of mapped out for me when we were talking about career planning. You're in, how do you get from A to B? So you look at A and you say, where are you? What are the skills that I have? What do I do really well? What do I enjoy doing on a daily basis? And then saying, okay, here's where I think I want to go. And first you need to validate whether or not that's actually where you want to go. And you do that by interviewing people. You do that by talking to people that are currently in the job. You do that by talking to hiring managers. What do you look for? And you basically build out a profile and you understand where are your gaps. And then you build a plan to make up for those gaps so that way you're very intentional. So every job I take from A getting to B, I'm looking at filling gaps in my resume. I'm looking at filling gaps in those skills that people are looking for as the hiring managers.
What are some of the gaps that you've filled over the years?
I would say every job I have had, I add something new to what I do. So whether or not, for example, I got my MBA, and when I went to go get my MBA, of course you have a ton of options in terms of your emphasis, and I got my emphasis in finance because that was something I was really uncomfortable talking to my CFOs and having I didn't know the questions to ask to get the answers I needed to present a good argument. And so I got my MBA with an emphasis in finance so I could have a seat at that table and feel confident when I was talking around financial statements, for example, or around my budget, or even building a business case. I would say in this job, I'm running strategic partnerships. I have never done that before. And so just every job I do, I take on just something additional along the way so that I can really build out a comprehensive profile for what I bring to the table for my next employer.
So let me just double click on, as they say, that's become, by the way, a big thing to say, double click. So let's double click on strategic partnerships. What does it mean? What do you do? How do you develop a successful strategic partnership?
So I think I would say we're still in our infancy, to be honest with you. We partner with a lot of different ATS providers out there. And I think part of it is identifying who are the ones. I had another great mentor, Mary O'Loughlin, and she said, you follow the revenue, follow where you have the most potential to drive value to your business and your clients. And so that's what we've really done. And I've been able to kind of tier out our partners, identify those that have the most potential, identify how we're going to work with them to make sure we really bring that to fruition, how much we need to invest in them from a time and resource perspective. And I think where before it was very haphazard, I think it just goes back to being really intentional about how do you want to present yourself in the market and with which partners, and making sure that you find partners that really align with your own philosophy around whether it's customer experience or revenue or price. Whatever that thing is that's most important to you, just making sure you're philosophically aligned with those partners and then investing in them and your own efforts to make sure that you're driving value to everybody that's in kind of that value chain.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Are there rev shares associated, or this is really just let's make sure that we integrate with all the right ATSs, that we have good relationships with them so that when the customer says, can you do XYZ with XYZ, you can say yes?
Sometimes yes, and sometimes no.
Got it. Case dependent.
It is. And I'm not saying rev share doesn't help, but rev share isn't kind of the end all be all for us. I'm sure some people won't like to hear that, but that is, at the end of the day, it's really about lifetime value for your client and building more value for us and for the customers that we work with.
And what's the sales model for Criteria, by the way? Do you have field team? Is it inside? Do I remember correctly that your expertise is managing sort of a commercial inside team, or have you done all of it?
I've done all of it at this point. So we do have an inside team. We also have a field team. We're actually just spinning up kind of a field team now that's really focused on larger opportunities.
What are your secrets to managing? What are the differences from your perspective in terms of managing a field team versus an inside team? And what sort of different skills do you leverage when you're driving and trying to motivate those folks?
I think there are a lot of similarities, but there are definitely a lot of differences. I think for my inside team, which has kind of been the core of my experience, that's probably where that's the majority of the foundation, because I've worked with a lot of companies that focus on SMBs. It's all about process and fine tuning it and making sure you find people that will follow the process. I think a lot of times we're hiring people that maybe have a little less experience or maybe on the inside sales side of the house. So for us, it's really about helping people get that situational fluency, being able to think on your feet, understanding the business challenges that customers are facing, and then really creating a repeatable process around that, making it as easy as possible for people to sign up for a product, to use a product. Again, it's all about creating repeatable processes that feel configurable and then custom to the client. Whereas on the enterprise side, or when you're talking with field reps, you're really kind of, 70% of the sales process might be really similar, but there's this 30% that's really variable. And I think it's kind of creating process around that 30% and making it so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time. But there is definitely a piece of it that is very unpredictable. And I almost feel like you learn something new on every deal that you work on the enterprise side of the house.
I'm sure you do. As you've evolved your career and as you've grown and been intentional, at some point, you're an individual contributor, then you became a manager. Now you're a vice president, and your responsibilities at this stage are as much about reporting upwards and managing upwards, both to the CEO and the board, I would imagine, as it is to, run your team and hit your number. How do you think about being an effective executive and making sure that you are telling the story in the right way to the CEO and the board? Like, what are your insights around executive leadership that are different from earlier in your career when you're more simply a manager of people?
Yeah. I would say the managing up, it's very much about setting expectations and like no surprises. So just like I tell my reps, like, hey, I don't want any surprises. Like, let me know if the deal isn't going down as soon as you can. Like, let me know if there's any risk. And I believe they have to manage up to me, just like I have to manage up to the board. So it is making sure that there aren't surprises, making sure that we're setting expectations, building out new teams. When I first started, we built out an SDR team, and it was setting expectations around how long is it going to take to actually see results here? Like, I know we all want them instantly, but let me just document and have conversations constantly around how long this is actually going to take before we see results. I think that's just a critical component. And then if I'm going to come to you and say, hey, there's risk in the revenue number this quarter, I do it as early as possible. And then I supplement that with a plan of, hey, how are we going to make sure this doesn't happen again?
How do you balance the tension between managing expectations appropriately versus the pressure, particularly in high growth companies, to commit to very aggressive goals?
Yeah, I think that, again, it has to start really early on, and there has to be a plan. So if there's a plan, if I know that there's a revenue gap, let's say there's a 10% revenue gap, then we have to build a plan around how we're going to bridge that gap. And I'm constantly reporting on, hey, how is this plan coming to fruition? And then adjusting expectations based on that and adding new things to the pile, right? Because at the end of the day, if there's a 10% gap, that just exists. So we need to start testing and learning as quickly as possible to make up for that. Or we need to decide we're going to invest in it and then figure out really early on if it's not going to work. Like, just failing fast, I think, is probably the most critical thing in that equation. But again, I think planning is the most important piece, making sure that you're not hitting your revenue numbers because you didn't hire enough people. That's always the worst. That's
but
really.
You also think that adding more salespeople isn't necessarily the way to grow revenue. So it's kind of there's sort of like a catch-22 there.
Yeah, 100%. Because like, you can't just add salespeople and think you're going to grow. There has to be a plan around how are you going to feed those salespeople? Because if it's an inbound team, you're going to be feeding them leads. If it's an outbound team, or if it's an enterprise team and you're expecting them to generate their own leads, what does that plan look like? And so when you build out that plan, you should know early on whether or not you're hitting it, and you need to be able to adjust. So yeah, you can't just add salespeople and expect to hit your revenue targets. There has to be so much more than just add 5 heads and make up your revenue gap, because there are things that need to be done when you add those 5 heads.
Yeah. At Criteria for the mid-market or commercial team, what is the expectation around the percent of their pipeline that the reps are supposed to individually create versus the other demand generation investments you're making around marketing and SDRs and things like that?
So on the SMB side of the house, or our inside sales team, almost all of our business comes inbound. So we have an amazing marketing team. They're absolutely incredible. They drive a ton of leads and a ton of awareness to our product and what we do. So we have a free trial model. So our inside team is really responsible for taking those free trials and inbound inquiries and converting them into paid sales. Our outside team is basically 100% responsible for creating their own pipelines. They work with our SDR team, but it's really all outbound efforts. Got
it. A few last questions in our time together, but one of them is, going back to that topic of men and women in the sales world, and I guess the professional world. You've mentioned that women come across different than men, and it doesn't play in their favor. Tell us what you mean by that, and maybe give us some ideas about what women can do differently, or what employers need to do differently to address some of these challenges.
Sure. And I'll speak actually really personally, which may or may not be helpful. But when I've interviewed for roles that I've gotten, actually, I said, hey, so tell me what the experience was. Like, did you know right away that I was the one that you wanted? Like, that it was it was going to be magical from the get-go. And it was really interesting because in most cases, I'm one of the only females going up for the role. I'm usually at the end head to head against a male counterpart. And at the end of the day, the comments are, Amyra, we really weren't sure whether or not it was you that did a lot of the things that you accomplished at your last job, or whether or not it was a team. We really didn't understand because you used a lot of we and us, and it was a team effort. And I know, people have written about this, et cetera, but what I didn't I actually recently asked that question. And it was interesting to hear that was one of the things that I did, because I didn't actually even realize I was doing it. So I sounded so collaborative that it didn't, at the end of the day, I'm the VP of sales. So I'm driving the initiative. I'm making sure that it happens. I'm sometimes leading it. But I'm always working with a team. I'm never doing anything by myself. When I hit my revenue numbers, I'm not out there closing the revenue myself. I have 10 people on my team, and all of us are working together, our marketing team, right? And for me, I didn't realize how much of an impact that had when I was relaying the successes that I've had. So
that's really interesting. I mean, I would think most people want you to use that sort of collectively because it shows that you're a team player and you're a collaborator, but your experience is it can actually be detrimental.
Yeah, because I directly heard, this other person came in and they said, yes, I did this, I did this, I did that. These are the results I got. And it just came across with a different level of confidence, maybe.
That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So to the point, maybe women need to use I more and be a little bit more, I guess, braggy or assertive or self-confident. Is that the advice maybe?
Maybe, or maybe just generally we need to change. And this is more of a long-term effort. Maybe we need to kind of change the attributes that we associate with strong leadership.
Yes, that sounds much more accurate than what I said.
But probably a lot more difficult. I would describe myself as very vulnerable, and I am 100% a servant leader. And I don't think people necessarily view vulnerability as a leadership trait. Some people do, some people don't. For me, I don't know how you be a good leader without being vulnerable.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think it's probably changing. I think the world is changing pretty quickly. And I think a lot of the behaviors that reinforced a lot of unconscious and conscious bias are hopefully being slowly eroded in favor of more open-minded behaviors.
I hope so for the next generation that comes behind us, right?
Absolutely. We're almost at the end of our time together, but what we like to do at this point is sort of pay it forward and talk about some of the folks that have influenced you or some of the content that's influenced you. And you've mentioned a few folks already, but when you think about some of your favorite VPs of sales or sales leaders that you think we should know about, talk to us. Who do you think we should know about? Lisa
Hudson is somebody, and she is my mentor, and she's become my friend over the years. And she was, I was working at Sage Software, and she was my VP of sales, at least on I did maintenance and support renewals. And I had moved up a couple steps, and she really is the one. I remember talking to somebody and I said, God, I really like Lisa Hudson as a leader. I think she's amazing. She really helps me again, get to the questions to ask so I can get the answers I need to be better at my job. And somebody said, yeah, I like her, but she's I don't think she was necessarily the stereotypical leader. They're yeah, she just seems very, I don't want to say girly is the right thing, but I'll see her giggle in meetings or I'll see her laugh, and she just seems very soft. And to me, it's she's the best leader I've ever worked with, one of them. And to me, it kind of reinforced the fact that I don't need to act differently than I actually am. I can be nurturing, if that's the word. I can be vulnerable, and I can be 100% true to my own brand and still be an exceptionally effective leader, because she brought all of those things to the table, and she brought incredible results at the same time, maybe just in a non-traditional way. And so for me, she really inspired me to kind of embrace who I was. And I feel like I've been very successful at what I've done and what I've accomplished, and haven't had to be anything but myself.
Those are wise words. I will attest. If folks are listening, Amyra, and they're inspired by what you just said, maybe they have non-traditional backgrounds, but they want to get into sales, and they recognize that Criteria has a testing framework that doesn't discriminate against the lack of experience in specific, core functions, but is testing for aptitude and personality, as you mentioned. Are you okay if people reach out to you, and what's your preferred mechanism?
Absolutely. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, that's great. Just let me know where you heard, why you're connecting, and where you heard me, because that's always really helpful. I'm a firm believer that I like to keep my LinkedIn network pretty tight. And so I don't accept all requests. So just make sure you let me know that you heard about me here on this podcast.
Sounds good. So it's Amyra space Rand, VP of Sales and Strategic Partnerships at Criteria Corp, in case they're searching on LinkedIn.
That's correct.
Awesome. Amyra, thanks so much for being on the show. We'll talk to you on Friday for Friday Fundamentals.
Thank you so much, Sam.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Jacobs. This is Sam's Corner. Loved that conversation with Amyra Rand. There's a couple things that jump out that I think are important. First, of course, we spent a long time talking about testing. And testing is important if you have the correct tests, of course, because it enables you to really try and strip out unconscious bias and to test for aptitude and personality, not just for exact matches on functional experience, right? So many people in their job descriptions, 5 years of SaaS sales experience required. Nobody ever really questions why. Why is that necessary? It's because we need that as a proxy to figure out who's going to be a good fit. But the thing that's going to best tell us who's a good fit is your aptitude, your ability to learn, your interest and intellectual curiosity in other people, and your personality and how you culturally fit with the organization. And that's not necessarily going to relate to whether or not you have quote unquote 5 years of SaaS sales experience. The other thing that's going to happen is you're going to discriminate against all the people that may have the high capability but don't have the exact match experience. Now, in the absence of any kind of testing framework, you're going to need that resume experience because you have no other way to tell. There's just too many people, there's too many candidates. That's why I think it is important, whether or not you choose Amyra's company or not, and this isn't intended to be an ad. This is just to say that we need to give more types of people that do not have direct sales experience, directly matching whatever we wrote in our job description. We need to give those people an opportunity, and we need a framework for doing it. So that's thing number one. The second thing I would say is testing allows you to accelerate your recruiting process, because once you know that they're going to be a good fit in an objective way, maybe you can move more quickly through the rest of the interviews. Amyra mentioned that she spends a lot less time on phone screens now because she has a testing framework in place. Finally, the other big thing that we talked about is really about leadership and about being the CEO of your own career, and why authenticity is so important. A number of different times Amyra mentioned that she brings her whole self to work. She's vulnerable. She embraces who she is. She doesn't try to fit herself into a specific mold, and that redounds to her benefit. So I think that's really important. Of course, who you are and bringing your whole self to work only works to the extent that you're not a sociopath, you don't like to touch people or harm people, you're not a huge asshole. So if you are a huge asshole or a sociopath, or you like touching people inappropriately, I would say don't bring your whole self to work. Bring a different side of yourself to work that enables you to collaborate with other humans and not intrude on their personal space. But if you are a good person and you like to collaborate, then do bring your whole self to work. So I'm being somewhat facetious, but there is a double-edged sword to that concept of bringing your whole self to work. And we still have to be careful that other people are feeling comfortable as we are being vulnerable, authentic, and our truest selves. Something to think about. So if that's all. That's all for Sam's Corner. Before we go, let's thank our sponsors. We've got two. Vidyard. Email isn't dead, but it sure is boring. So take a look at saleshacker.com/Vidyard to figure out how you can incorporate videos into your ongoing communication. And Outreach, the leading sales engagement platform. You can reach me, linkedin.com/Sam F. Jacobs. Thanks very much for listening. And of course, I'll talk to you next time.
You